I'm very happy that we've got Kirk here, who's going to talk about what AI means in the modern workplace, and not necessarily on a technical level like I was talking about, but integrated into the systems that actually make you more effective without having to think about it. And I love that we are using AI in this manner. If we can give people easier access to data, easier information sharing, and making the machines do the churning and do the hard work, then we are on a good path to make AI just a simple thing and a normal thing we use, and not a magical, scary thing in the corner that nobody wants to touch. So without further ado, he says he's not big on titles, so I'm not going to give you a title. So this is Kirk Koenigsbauer, please. Your stage.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. What I'm going to do today for the next 30 minutes is talk to you about how AI is shaping the way work gets done in companies large and small, give you a little bit of perspective of how we're able to practically put AI to work and some of the techniques that we have available to us, and how it's really going to shift the way that work gets done, helping people be more creative, helping them automate repetitive tasks, helping them get better insights, deeper insights about people, about processes, about information, and so forth, so they can make better decisions. And so that's kind of what the speech will be. I've got a couple of slides. I've got a bunch of demos to walk you through to show you in real time what's going to happen, and we'll take it from there. As a little bit of a tee-up, I think it's interesting to take a step back and think about the context that we're in. I mean, we're definitely in a complete generational shift in terms of how AI is going to change the way work gets done. And to take you back a little bit in history, I'm a little bit of a history buff myself. The scientific revolution started, in like the 16th century, something along those lines. Many people were working on discoveries and had ideas and had thoughts of how they could change the world and shape the world in really interesting ways. But they were hamstrung by the limits of mathematical computation. It was very challenging for folks. In fact, people would spend, almost entirely their lifetime working on mathematical formulas, writing, handwritten computation, and it would take them literally, years and years to solve some of these problems, and it was inefficient. And so, enter. I think it was early sort of mid-1600s, John Napier, who was Scottish-born mathematician. He was an inventor. He was an incredible person. If you read books about him, it's pretty fascinating to see all the things that he was able to accomplish. And after spending 20 years of his life in mathematics and writing, I think it's quoted as something like 10 million different equations by hand, which I can't even possibly fathom, he made a very, very important discovery that would really change the way mathematics and, frankly, the scientific revolution happened. And that, of course, was the introduction of logarithms. And today we take logarithmic tables for granted. We use them in everything that we end up doing today. It's such a core thing, but it massively simplified things, and it allowed people to be able to do sort of 1,000 times the work in about 1,000th of the time it would take. And that's a pretty compelling thing. And when you think about all the different breakthroughs in technology today, math and science is such a core part of it, whether it's sending people to the moon or into orbit, whether it's medical work that gets done, healthcare work, whether it's today's physical infrastructure. Of course, all the software that you all write every single day is so dependent on this. And I think, the broad statement I'm trying to make is we're sort of at a similar moment of change here with the introduction of artificial intelligence over the last decade. It's really taken quite steam. And if our limitations in the past were about mathematical computation, our challenge today is really something different. It's how can we infuse the notion of human ingenuity into the problems that we're trying to solve with technology? How can we infuse layers of judgment, pattern matching? How can we infuse predictive reasoning, cognitive processes, and so forth to help solve problems? And that's essentially what we're trying to do with AI, and of course do it in a real-time, highly scalable, highly secure way. And that's the core of what we're trying to do, get computers to essentially think and see and understand like humans can. And it definitely will be the defining tech of our time. It's also, of course, an important time, and there were topics earlier this morning, there'll be topics later today, that talk about the ethics around AI and the responsibility that we have around AI. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful set of technology, and at the same time, we have an incredibly important responsibility to make sure that as we are deploying these kinds of capabilities, we're doing so in a responsible way. At Microsoft, we really believe in responsible AI in a big way. We start with the premise that privacy is sort of this human fundamental right. When we talk about our data privacy policies as an example, we're very, very clear that the data is your data. You own it. You control it. You decide who has access to it. You can delete it. You can take it with you. It's such an important piece of what we're trying to accomplish. And of course, we also are big proponents of the notion of AI being used for good. And again, there's lots of conversation during today to talk about these topics. I'm not going to focus on them today, but it's a really, really important piece. It's incredible to me to think about just the advances and the rate upon which some of this AI tech is really taking off, is really getting good. Certainly, there's lots more work yet to go do, but it's pretty impressive. You can see some of the stats that are here. You know, at Microsoft, we've been investing deeply in AI for many years, and some of these investments are really paying off. You know, you can see how, whether it's vision, whether it's speech, whether it's language, we're basically at a point now where machines can recognize and interpret at about the same rate that humans can across these different dimensions. Of course, there's more work to go do. Of course, there's edge cases and complex scenarios and so forth. But it's really quite impressive to see some of the AI breakthroughs that are available. Another important piece, of course, is that we're trying to democratize AI by building these services, making them available in our cloud, such that they can be used in every possible type of scenario, from retail to healthcare to education. There's been some really interesting work done in education. Fields like agriculture, really using it to modernize some of these, historically very analog, very sort of human capital-intensive processes. Automotive, you think about all the notion of self-driving cars and so forth. There's just so many different ways that AI is going to impact the world, and democratizing it is a key part of our strategy. In fact, just as one example, and I'll show you in a couple minutes on the screen, we've created a number of different services that are available up on Azure, a number of cognitive services that you can use today to build into your apps, into your services, into the bots that you're building, into the code that you're writing around vision, around speech, around language, around search, around information discovery and knowledge and so forth. In fact, why don't I show you a neat tool if you haven't seen it yet. We can get the Surface device here. Great. So you can go to azure.com. You can see the URL that's here. This is a page that we have up that gives you an example of some of the cognitive services, and you can kick the tires on some of these things. There's a good example here, for example, of how we have APIs to analyze images. And you can go ahead and drop in an image here if you want to. I can just browse for one. I've got one on my device. I'll pick this one of lions here. And watch as I drop it in. It'll take a second or two to update on the page, but you'll see the values and the tags that we're able to extract out of that particular image. You can see grass, you can see outdoor, on a rock. If you look at the bottom, you can see a lion sitting on a rock, and you can actually see the confidence rate that's there. It's a simple but pretty cool example. And you can click through these other ones that you see here. There's another example of reading text in images. That's pretty cool. For example, I'll go and pick an image I've got here. This is interesting. When you look at this picture, it'll probably be hard, as you see it come up on the page, it'll be hard for you to see, what are the books that are in that stack. It's kind of impossible almost with the human eye. But immediately we're able to go and parse through that, and we can pull out all the text here. You can see the titles, you can see the author, you can see the collections and so forth in those examples. And then maybe one last one here at the bottom, looking at handwritten text is also a pretty interesting thing. And there's a sample that's here. There's a couple one. Here's one of a Post-it note as an example. Notice that it's askew and it's handwritten text, and we're able to sort of parse through that. So it's a good example, I think, of some of the services that we have available for you to use right now, and you can kick the tires on. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about how we can apply some of these capabilities, or how we are applying some of these capabilities in Microsoft 365, in the Office applications within Windows, even using our management stack and our security stack. And I'm going to show you some end-user examples that hopefully give you a sense of how we're trying to amplify the human ingenuity, the potential that people have using this AI tech in ways that they haven't been able to do so before. So if we can flip back to the demo machine one more time. How many people build slides that look like this? Black text, white background. This is pretty advanced stuff, I know. This is the way most of my slides start. I want to show you a couple of examples of ways that we are using AI tech to essentially create almost a designer in the cloud that any end user, regardless of their skill set of PowerPoint, can create sort of beautiful looking content using some of the cognitive services that I just showed you a couple of minutes ago. First thing I'll do is I'll show you an example of how we can manage pictures. So oftentimes you want to jazz up your presentation. You might select a couple pictures, you drop it in, and this is what you typically see in the very center of the screen in PowerPoint. We just kind of stack them up on top of each other. But a couple of things are happening here that I want to point out. First of all, it went away so quickly. Hopefully you might have got a chance to see it. We automatically use our services to go to the cloud and add alt text for people that have accessibility needs. It's a really, really great capability, and it's done automatically for you as a part of PowerPoint. That's pretty cool in and of itself. But if you look over on the right side of the screen, underneath where it says Design Ideas, what we do is we actually take that PowerPoint presentation, we run it through a bunch of ML processes, and we create essentially a beautiful looking slide like you see here. And in fact, there's a whole set of slides that you can choose from as the end user. There's the training that's going on in the background. In fact, we just actually hit our 3 millionth keep. This has been out in the wild probably for 6 months or so, and we test, of course, and see which ones people keep and so forth, and that keeps improving the solution. But notice a few things here. In fact, let me go back up. This is a pretty good one to select. This is using a bunch of different techniques. It's using facial recognition, so you can see that picture of, I guess, sort of an android there in the upper right box. Notice that we're not cropping that particular face, even though it's not a human face, out of the picture itself. We're picking up the color scheme across those different pictures, and we're using it to help us with the template. So there's a bunch of different techniques that we're using here, which are pretty cool for the pictures themselves. Here's a second example of PowerPoint in some of the work that we're doing. For example, if you look at this particular text, you can see these are all times. It's essentially an agenda. It's a timeline of sorts. If I go over on the right, look at what PowerPoint creates for me automatically. All these different templates. It picks out the fact that we understand that text is about time, and so we create a timeline automatically. And this just ends up using the sort of core, PowerPoint capabilities. There's this thing called Smart Art where people can create shapes and add text and anchor them and so forth. This would normally probably take a normal human, 30 minutes to go and build something that you see here. Here in PowerPoint, it's done automatically for you. Another example, using that sort of text analysis capability, is what we're doing to sort of pick out, in this case, verbs or gerunds from the text that you see on the slide here. And we can create, again, different kinds of solutions. I like this one in particular because it's showing you a couple things. It's super subtle, but hopefully you pick up on it. Notice the text says, focus on human-machine interactions. We're actually pulling an iconography. We're pulling a graphic of a brain and some gears in it to represent that notion of human-machine interaction. Or bring together the academy and the industry. We've picked an icon here that is of people shaking hands. Rationalize the black box. Well, we got the box right. It's yellow. Maybe next time we'll make it black. That's the idea of how these things will improve themselves over time. But you get the idea of what we're trying to do with these images. I'll jump out of PowerPoint here, and let's go over to Excel, just to give you another example of some of the work we're doing. We've got a bunch of different services that we're running in Excel that are AI-backed at this point. We do some social analysis work for social content, which is a cool one that's available, built in the product now, uses an Azure service on the back end. The one I'm going to show you right here is something we just launched. It's very similar to that notion that we have with PowerPoint of ideas and helping people do sort of automatic analysis of this kind of content. Let's just say I got this particular spreadsheet here, and my boss says he wants me to analyze it pretty quickly. I just did a quick Control-Shift down, and you can see there's over 4,400 records in this. Not a huge table, but pretty good size. And if I had to come up with some conclusions on this thing pretty quickly, it's gonna take me some time. But if I click on Ideas here, similar to that designer feature, we are essentially looking at the content in this spreadsheet. We're analyzing that content, and Excel, using its service in the back end, is essentially going to pull out different patterns, different things that it's identifying. And it creates these sort of mini cards that you can see on the right side of the screen. And so I can go through these, and I'll just hit a couple of them briefly. It's identifying that there are spend increases over time. That's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's saying that the payroll group has noticeably higher spend. These actually, the way we've sort of designed the UI, they get more sort of complicated or deeper, more deeply insightful as you go down the list. And in this case, we sort of picked up 34 different, different analysis as a part of this spreadsheet. And once you've got one like this stock compensation thing, I can just go ahead and drop it right into the PowerPoint, right into the Excel presentation here, and it sets up my whole pivot table for me. Again, it's doing analysis work, it's automating work. I bet there's not that many people that actually know how to set up pivot charts or pivot tables. It's doing all that for you. It's a pretty powerful set of capabilities. One last example I'll show you in these sort of core Office apps is in Microsoft Word. And I'd love to show this one, because I just think it's so cool what we're able to do by analyzing language using some of these ML techniques. This is a simple table that we've got, and it's got some examples of how we're trying to help Word make people better writers. Word's always had grammar and spell checking capabilities, and by the way, those are now all essentially ML-backed in our service. But we're also helping people with language clarity. And if you're familiar with Word, it used to have red squiggles. Now we have gold squiggles to sort of identify some of these interesting tendencies. So for example, things like informal language or colloquialisms, they're going to go bananas over Office 365. If I right mouse click here, it actually says go wild, sort of clear language. Or one of my favorites, double negation. I mean, how often in technology do we all use double negation? I did not see nothing. A lot of people go, what exactly does that mean? Here, it actually will correct that for me. I did not see anything. Or passive voice. They were quickly caught by the police. It's better English to say the police quickly caught them. Or things like gender-specific language. The airline is hiring more stewardesses. Stewardesses isn't a word that people love to use these days. And so it's actually going through and it's saying flight attendants is a better use of that language. Again, there's age bias. You can see a whole bunch of other things that we're looking for here. But it's pretty cool tech that we're building into Word, again, using AI in the background, using these ML models to help people be essentially better writers. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. I'm going to go back to slides for a quick second. And it's awesome when we've got all these really cool AI services that we can run in the back end. But of course, core to this is having a great data set that you can use to actually interpret and really take advantage of the capability that's there. There's a concept that we have, a service that we have called the Microsoft Graph. And the Microsoft Graph is essentially a set of REST APIs. It's on a per tenant basis. You can log in essentially to the graph for your specific tenant, for your company. Obviously, it's secure and private and so forth. Again, you control the data. You have access to it and so forth. But essentially, it's giving you access to all the data that's generated in that tenant from the users in your organization for things like calendar information, contact information, mailboxes, files. There are a bunch of intent-driven interpretations that we can pull out of the Microsoft Graph itself. It's a massive data set. When we look at it on a global basis, of course, it's different for every single tenant. But we've got over 150 million people every single month using Microsoft 365 or using Office 365 just in the commercial space alone. And there's just a tremendous amount of signal that's getting generated there that we can reason over using these AI techniques. And so if we could switch to the machine one more time, I want to show you a tool called the Graph Explorer, which again, you can go kick the tires on. You can just go up to the URL that you see here, developermicrosoft.com, and you can essentially explore the graph and some of the APIs that we have. I've got a couple of quick examples here. For example, I can look at my profile, and you can, if you look down, I know it might be a little bit tough for folks in the far back, but essentially I get my profile from the graph, my name, my title, the email address that I might have, pretty basic stuff, but something that you might want to use in your own application. Maybe I want to pull my photo out and use that in another app that I go build. That's a good-looking picture of me. I like that. I think that's pretty cool. Maybe I want to have a process that's used to go and suck mail out of my email address and use that in some application that I'm building, maybe some workflow or some business process. Here I clicked on my mail, and essentially it's giving me the last email that was sent to this particular user. In this case me. There are other things that you can do as well, you can search on this content. It's great because we do fuzzy mapping on things like names of people. So if you're building an application and you are wanting to pull information about an individual, you can search for that information. If you're getting a user string passed on by a user and that user spells it wrong, this name here, Markozic, is a hard name for some people to spell. Maybe they get it wrong. Our fuzzy matching will give you that information as appropriate. Another example here is that you can search the graph for different topics. And what's cool about this is, again, it's using this notion of the graph that are topics associated that I might be a part of. So it's using, in this case, again, I'm looking at my profile, topics around Office, and it's going to give me a list of those. And you can see all the JSON here at the bottom of the screen. So with that Graph Explorer, hopefully you get a sense of what the Microsoft Graph really is. And then, of course, you can use this in a number of different applications that you're building on your own. I'll give you a couple of examples. If we can switch back to the slides for a second, or the demo machine. OK, great, cool. We're still there. I think what I'll do is I'll start with this one here. I don't know if anyone has used Microsoft Teams in this group, but Teams is a new product for essentially, we call it as a hub for collaboration. It's got persistent chat and messaging. You can integrate bots into those chat services, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. It's got meetings capability. It's got the Office applications integrated into it. It's this great place for end users to go and essentially have access to all the content that their team might be working on. In it, there's a persistent chat service. You're sort of seeing it here. And I'm showing you an example of Zoom AI, which is a bot that is made by a company in Toronto, Canada. And they have essentially, they build assistant tech that integrates, in this case, into Microsoft Teams. And their AI bot does a bunch of different things. It can help you schedule meetings, which is great. So you can just type in, hey, I want to schedule a meeting with Frank, and let's do it sometime next week. And it'll find the appropriate time for you. This bot uses the Microsoft Graph on the back end to sort of get that information. One great example that I'll show you here is, let's say we're in the bot, and I want to go and find some marketing plan, some sort of content. If I type in that query to the bot, what it essentially does is it goes back to the Microsoft Graph, and it pulls out a collection of documents that might be relevant to this particular team, to this particular set of people, again, all powered on the back end by the graph, and using AI and machine learning to sort of make sure we get the right documents here. It's a really good example of how a third party is using the Microsoft Graph in a bot inside of Teams to deliver really great value to an end user. The last example that I want to give you is actually in switch machines here to the mobile device. Here in the inbox, it says Microsoft Outlook Calendar. What it's actually doing, now I'm like going to keep checking to make sure it's there. What it's actually doing is it's going back and it's checking the graph, and it is essentially creating a contact card based on my calendar for the flight I'm literally taking tomorrow. And it pulls out just the important information, from the itinerary that was sent to me. And these airline itineraries, they're as complicated as can be, and they're long, and they're hard to read. But it pulls out, for example, not just the time and the duration, but my confirmation code and all that sort of stuff, which is kind of nice. That's one small example. Another example that's quite interesting, I think, is the search capability that we've built into Outlook, which, again, uses the graph and uses AI. As an example, let's say I'm looking for someone, a mail from my boss, Rajesh. So I'll go and tap on his name here, and it pulls back for me all of the email discussions that we've had recently, and it presents them here. But it does a whole bunch of more interesting stuff than that. It'll also, for example, tell me the same meetings that I'm going to be in with Rajesh, or the files that I've been working with him. You can also do really cool things, like if I go to his contact card here, we link the identity that we have with Rajesh in this particular tenant to LinkedIn. It's a really cool capability. Here you can see we pull the LinkedIn content directly into this contact card in Microsoft 365, and I can see it right within Outlook itself. Again, it's a great example of marrying the Microsoft Graph, in this case with the LinkedIn Graph. There are other examples as well. For example, you see, of course, an organizational chart. Not only does it have his directs, but again, another great example of how the graph can be so powerful is these are all of the people that Rajesh works with on a day-to-day basis, whether or not they're in his direct organizational chain. So for example, Brad Smith runs legal for Microsoft. He's in this list. Jared Spataro is on the marketing team. He's on this list. Catherine Boger is on our HR team. She's on this list. So you get to see the sort of map of people that you're working with, and it can be delivered, again, and powered all from the Microsoft Graph. All right, if we could go back to the slides. Perfect. Well, with that, I want to wrap up and just maybe leave you with a few thoughts as we close. I hope this gives you sort of a rapid-fire sense of how we're trying to use AI inside of Microsoft 365. I hope it gives you a sense of the power of the tooling that we have with these cognitive services, which we're using as a sort of first-party recipient of them in Microsoft 365. But of course, they're available for you to use in your own tools and your own products and your own projects that you're working on. I hope you got a sense of the Microsoft Graph and the power of what that graph can do in terms of giving you a rich API set into a very, very powerful set of data that you can pull into your own applications, like that Zoom AI demo I showed you a few moments ago. I'd really encourage you to go up to Microsoft.com and visit the developer Microsoft.com site. You can check out a lot of these demos. There's some really good stuff there. And hopefully, you've got a good sense of some of the things that we can do. Please have a great rest of the conference. And thanks so much for your time. Thank you.